Fans, we are live once again on the Hannibal TV on YouTube with a special Thursday edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling. And we'll have a very special guest today to talk about, a unique career as truly a Canadian independent veteran. But my goodness, he's done a lot of locations. He's had some really interesting matches and opponents, and we're going to get to all of that. But before we do, I also want to right off the bat talk about how Mr. Rob Stardom has a book out now, a retrospective of his career. There's the actual book too, and we'll throw that up at the end as well. It's entitled Chasing Stardom, Canadian Pro Wrestler Rob Stardom, My 25-Year Pro Wrestling Journey. Really pleased to welcome you to the Great North Wrestling Podcast, Rob.
It's an honor. I've watched your podcast forever. Big fan of the YouTube channel, so thank you for having me. I'm also a YouTuber. I don't know if you know that, but I'm a monetized YouTube vlogger. You can check out my stuff. Here's me dropping links already. Just search me, Rob Stardom Vlog on YouTube. You'll find me. Please subscribe.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. In fact, I think I remember when you launched your channel about 2 years ago. I was talking to you then about doing an interview. So it's good that we're finally getting the chance to close the loop on that. At the end of our discussion, we'll have all the information that the fans need.
Oh, yes.
In terms of where to follow you and get your book. But before we get into all of that, I like to do in these deep dive career interviews to give the fans a baseline of where an individual's coming from. Start off with asking if, and I think I know the answer to this, but growing up, were you a fan of the business? And if so, what companies, territories, etc. did you follow?
Oh, yes. Being from Manitoba, I was a big fan of, first off, the AWA. I can remember earliest wrestling or earliest memories. Like, I don't remember a lot about the different TV shows I watched when I was like an infant, but I can tell you AWA wrestling, the Crusher, the Baron, all Mad Dog Vachon, all those guys. I watched that, and I can still remember to this day. One day, I'm a little kid sitting in front of the TV getting ready for AWA wrestling. I turned the TV on. I didn't have a remote, so I turned the TV on, and then there was no AWA wrestling. There was Randy Savage cutting a promo. Like, I didn't know what's going on, right? But AWA was gone, and I used to watch. I had Farmer Vision. We didn't have cable. At small town. I lived out in the boonies, so I got from time to time Stampede Wrestling and also WFWA Wrestling, and that evolved to UWF and NWA. Tony farmed out his TV, but that's another type of story. But and then late at night when I was a teenager, Glow Wrestling, and of course I watched WWF and every wrestling magazine I could get my hands on. Anytime I could get a VHS of a show, I would get it too from the local gas station and rent it. So yeah, big time fan.
Yeah, that's reminiscent of a lot of us of about the same vintage that before streaming and whatnot, we were somewhat limited as to what we could find. But man, those wrestling magazines cemented a lot of fandom. What? So you're a big fan. What was the factor, or was there a specific moment where you decided, you know what, I'm going to give this wacky business a go myself? What made you pursue this?
Okay, well, I would say that if UFC would have been popular, I probably would have went that route, but it just wasn't. And I played all the sports you could think of at a decently high level for being a small town kid with not as many opportunities, let's say. And I loved did some amateur wrestling as well. And I had a pretty high level boxer that lived right as a farm neighbor, so he lived about 2 miles away. So I did all of this hand-to-hand combat type stuff, and I just loved sports. And unfortunately, I wasn't going to make it to the NHL or the NBA or the CFL or NFL, and but I wasn't as interested in those either. I truly loved wrestling, and I just didn't know how to get into wrestling. So I can't tell you what made me. It's something I always liked. I guess you could say I've always liked ice cream, and I don't know why. I just always have, and I literally can never remember a time in my life where I haven't really loved wrestling. So the path to pro wrestling wasn't like easy, and it wasn't like I just ended up going to pro wrestling school and became a wrestler right away. Kind of a few little curveballs in my young adult life, but I got there.
Yeah, I in doing research for our discussion, I noticed that you were trained under a man who's no stranger to Great North Wrestling, and that would be the great Vance Nevada, who of course came out with that extremely seminal work on Canadian pro wrestling. Wanted to know about how you hooked up with Vance, and I guess Dave Levinsky as well.
Yeah, well, I can.
As your trainers.
I would say so. Vance was I would call a mentor nowadays. When you really look at it, I would say a mentor, early mentor. I give training credit to Dave Levinsky, is who you would say the Crimson Sheik, Big Daddy Caddy. If you were watching the Brother Midnight promos that went viral with Cornette, right? Big Daddy Caddy. Dave used to work for Tony Condello a lot, and he really didn't train me that much, to be honest. I guess when you really look at it, you could say sure Vance trained me, but it was a mix of guys. So originally started with Dave, and I had my first couple matches, and Dave as my trainer. Another veteran wrestler came. Brother Midnight showed me how to run the ropes in the training facility, because Dave was actually a big older man at that point, so he wasn't running no ropes, if you know what I mean. And then when those guys were kind of done, and we knew just the bare bones basics, that's when I would say Vance came in and really helped give us the training. And he was almost always the booker when I was at a young age in the business for any company I worked for, and he also helped get me bookings. So I would say that's how Vance was involved, but my training was like a buffet of the veterans in that company that I started with, River City Wrestling, when I started.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that, because I've actually got a question about Brother Midnight on here, which we'll get to in a minute. But we've heard a lot of veterans talk about how the training, the actual training process today isn't the way it was even 20, 25 years ago, let alone in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
What sticks out in your mind into the actual work that you did, in terms of were you just shown, here's how it is? Did you do basics? And was it what you thought it was going to be?
So I would say, Dave was an older gentleman who was a big guy. I'll tell you, Dave didn't take a single bump in that training. So like, I know when I work with guys, I do a lot of show and tell first. And I can remember, like, jump up as high as you can, kid, and land, and you're like landing on your head, taking choke slams by yourself, and you don't know what's going on. And so we did that sort of thing, and the meat grinder, where everybody chops you a million times, which I don't know, like, I don't think nowadays they do that kind of stuff, where it's, you get a little bit beaten up a bit. And but then we did amateur wrestling too. But it was different, because most of the guys didn't have any amateur background or training or anything. So I found it very easy. Like I pinned the guys training me amateur wrestling. So, I mean, I'm sure Hannibal could probably pin me, maybe, you know, but definitely for me in Winnipeg, it was no problem when it came to that sort of thing for the physicality and stuff. And I was, you know, in that not so straight road to pro wrestling, you know, I was a drunken brawler, if you know what I mean, a lot of times as a wild young man. So the actual, I would say I never had, like, I was hoping it to get stretched. You know, you hear all that stuff about wrestling and wrestling with shadows that came out, and you'd see the guy Stu stretching him out and stuff. And I wanted that experience, and sadly I didn't get it. So that's kind of what I'm thinking the whole time through this training is like, somebody's going to rip me apart. Somebody's going to like really give it to me. But I mean, it was hard work. Don't get me wrong. Like, it was hard training and I had to work really hard. And, but yeah, I didn't get stretched out.
Do you think the, you know, speaking in terms of, I know there's a lot of trainers out there that are still wrestling guys that, you know, believe in that old school credo and believe in putting a guy, or I guess a girl now, through their paces to quote unquote toughen them up, because wrestling is, no matter how you slice it, a demanding sport, and it takes that toll on your body. Do you think that some folks are getting a disservice by not going through some of the things that say you went through and others before you?
100%. You know, I had the opportunity in my last tour of Japan to run a dojo and do some training with the young boys there. And, you know, here's the difference. And if you do indie shows in Japan, those guys are disciplined. Like, all those wrestlers are disciplined. Maybe not so much in North America. And it boils down to human rights. I'll tell you that, because in Japan, they'll beat the shit out of you. And you're expected to do your physical fitness aspect of it and all that kind of stuff. And here, you know, I have I have a dojo in my backyard. I've got a building in my backyard, and most guys just can't do the physical fitness. Can't do the physical fitness, and they don't want to. And I don't want to beg them to be a pro wrestler. Nobody had to beg me. So it's usually they can't do the physical fitness, and then they can't do because I start with physical fitness, and then we do amateur wrestling and a little bit of submissions. And when once they get through the physical fitness, they're expecting a big old wind up punch and stomp my foot and they're surprised when it's a hook and a down we go, and it's a different situation, right? So I don't want to say the newer generation is soft, because I don't want to be one of those guys that say that, oh, human rights ruined the business. It didn't, because there's a lot of good things in the evolution of society, right? Because society has changed as a whole, and I feel like it's better to a certain extent, but you're not getting the true flavor. And somebody told me the other day that I was talking to them, and they told me this story where they're getting in the business, and this is more recent, and they got an easy time training. And I said to them, you know, if your dream was to drink this special drink and you couldn't get it anywhere and you wanted it all your life, and you finally get to that drink and the bartender dumps a bunch of water in it, you just watered it all down, it's not really what you wanted, and you're not really experiencing it. Like I said, I wanted to get stretched out and sorry, Mr. Hart, and things. And later in the dungeon, Stu was there, and it never happened. So, I mean, maybe someday. I ranted. I don't know if I said what you wanted, but I just gave it to you.
No. That's an excellent analogy as well. And speaking of the godfather of the Hannibal TV, Hannibal himself is watching our broadcast and has a question, and he's saying we're both clearly Canadian patriots. I know yes, that's one of your calling cards, so to speak. And he's asking, what do you think about WWE Hall of Famer Donald Trump's supposed serious interest in making Canada the 51st state? Would this benefit wrestlers from our country? What do you think of that whole deal?
Okay, well, I've got two conflicting answers here, because the first answer is, I'll answer the second part first. It definitely would benefit the pro wrestlers, because I am a traveling wrestler who, I'll tell you, the hoops as an indie nobody I have to jump through to get 2 shows in the States is ridiculous. I don't want to go too much because people could be listening, and I don't, but if you're in the business, you might understand what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
So the thoughts that I could just get in my car and have no worries, just similar to if I was driving to Regina, Saskatchewan, no problem, right? Just across a border and there and there, to then do any show in the States. That would take so much pressure off. But I'll tell you that it's not the right thing to do. You know, it's our identity. We're Canadian. We're not American. You know, we're not the 51st state. We've had this long-term relationship forever. Come on, man. Come on.
Do you think he's President Trump? Do you think he's
he's working, man?
Okay, but that's a good point. You anticipated my question. Do you think it's a work or it's a shoot, or is it a work that's turning into a shoot?
I think it's I think it's just it's like shock headlines. And I said this the other day too, that he's I tell my wife watching the news that man, this is pro wrestling. You know, like what he's like, this is pro wrestling, different storylines all the time. Like, I want to tune in and see what's happening. Like, I 100% do. You know, it's interesting, and the heel heat he's getting from one group of people and the baby face pop he's getting from the other, like, it's just a master work, and just all the different storylines, and they're interjecting mid-carders and like, oh man, like, it's unbelievable. And if you just got to watch and go, wow. And I like to keep a loop what's going on in the world, and I always watch the news. That might sound like I'm a boring old man, but it's true. But this has made it so I'm seeking out news all the time, and I want to see what's going on. Like, this reminds me of me in like 1998, trying to get every single wrestling magazine I could. And not only am I watching WCW, Nitro, and Raw, I'm watching now Thunder and Saturday Night, and then, oh my God, there's Shotgun Saturday Night, like every single thing. Like, I am seeking out those Sunday B wrestling shows, but in a news sense now, because of all of the heat this guy's generating, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. It's certainly not boring. It'll be interesting to see how it turns out in the end. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is a work, but a lot of folks say, "Oh, people in wrestling thinks everything's a work," but yeah, if you look at
a lot of things are a work.
Yeah,
just letting you know that you think it's not a work, but it's a work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You mentioned River City Wrestling, and I had to ask you about this. Being one who listened to the 605 Super podcast, this individual, Mr. Last, brought Brother Midnight to some prominence there, and with his promos, et cetera, et cetera. So I had to ask you about your experience working with, I guess his shoot name is Stan Saxon, and were you
That's
ever
his work
around?
name too. That's his work name too. Just letting you know that.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good. He's good at kayfabe. You talk, Saxon's, I'd say, the king of kayfabe. I was so drunk one time, he carried me home from the bar and put me right on the front step, knocked on the door of my house, and my wife-to-be answered the door, and she was super pissed. But that's Saxon was, you talk about kayfabe, he was great at separating real life from the business. And a great example, as you said, his shoot name is Stan Saxon. I'm not going to say his shoot name, but it definitely is not Stan Saxon. And a lot of people would think that. And I really, really looked up to him as a young boy in the business. You'd see in the dressing room, you'd see lots of. He was a true pro, but he worked the boys too much. Now I look back and quit working us, but we were marks, So I used to do that too a little bit to some of the, but very good in the ring. Unfortunately, he had an injury, and it really, really dampened his career. He hurt himself in the Maritimes, and I think he was like one of the last bookers for Dupree, right? And yeah, he was a hell of a talent, interesting guy, and great in the ring, great psychology, and he still comes around once in a while. Oh wait, Hannibal, shout out Hannibal, since he said he was watching.
Yeah, he absolutely is. You
hell of a promo too.
Yes, yeah, that style was certainly an attention grabber. What was it like to break into River City Wrestling there? Because they seem to have a good thing going for a while, like a small but really rabid sort of fan base. They had the one location that they had TV on Shaw, and they did their cards in the one location. Was that a good foundation for you?
It was, but TV had already dried up. There was no TV at that time. But when I was started with River City Wrestling, they had a weekly Monday bar show. They had a bi-weekly Wednesday show. The best thing about River City Wrestling, though, there's a couple things. They had a training center, and literally, like, I was there all the time. It was great. And then it was a blessing and a curse. So many rookies, like the crew was probably 85-90% rookies. So you got to make a lot of mistakes. And maybe when you're in a locker room full of veterans, like if the percentage was different, it was 90% veterans, you'd be scared shitless to try stuff. So you got that opportunity to try stuff and fail or throw it against the wall and see if it's stuck. So that was really good for River City Wrestling, and they kept us pretty busy. And with Vance being in there, he started to, farm us out to Candelo and stuff like that. So it was great. It was great. Didn't have there was another company, CWF, NWA, and you had to sign a contract if you were even training and couldn't work for other people and stuff like that. So it was a good alternative.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask you, given your Winnipeg location, a man that I interviewed several years ago, Tony Condello, your experience working with him. Now, I understand that you didn't do his famous Northern Death tours, but did it for another company, I believe it was CWF.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Condello, he's a legend. Like, I've worked with Condello since '99, and he's still we could probably text him right now. He's up north right now. And, we've done shows where we get in a boat. You get to take your vehicle, you drive it onto a boat, and you go across to the town. And crazy thing, so doing that show, coming back, the boat was broken. So you can't get back. So we can't take the ring truck to the next town, because there's another town. So we had to take the ring and put it on little fishing boats, like little speed boats.
Oh my.
And then cross the thing. And then Tony knows everybody. He's been doing this for, I don't know, maybe 50 plus years. I don't know. He's forever. Tony's been doing it forever. So this random school bus just shows up with this guy. We get in the bus and we keep going to the next town and the next town, and unbelievable. But I remember Brody Steele was on that show, and big Brody in this little boat and the ring, and his crazy times. Tony is a legend. And I'll say this, a lot of local guys haven't had the opportunity to work for Tony, but we take Tony for granted. Like, everybody jokes around with him that he's so easygoing, but Tony deserves a lot more credit in this business than he gets. It's great to see when like AEW comes to town and they'll show Tony on TV and stuff, which is, it's really good. But Tony's got some wild stories, and he chain smokes like a motherfucker. You're in that, you want to be in that car with him. I still like to get in the car with him, even though, man, the next day I can barely breathe and I'm dying. But a lot of the young guys you see, and here's the difference in age and thought process. They don't want to be in that car with him because he smokes and he's going, you can't see at night for driving and stuff like that. I love it. It's awesome. I don't care. Let's go, Tony. Sure, you can drive, Tony. Let's go.
Yeah, talk about a truly Canadian legend in the business. You're not going to find stories like that anywhere else. Wanted to ask you, speaking of veterans, you've done a lot of tag work and a lot of singles as well, of course. But I noticed in 2000 you had an opportunity to work with Paul Diamond of Bad Company and Orient Express fame, and wondering. I had the opportunity to interview him last year as well, and you know, what an interesting fella. What your experience was like, and did you pick his brain there at that early stage of your career?
As you know, as best I could. So he's from Winnipeg, I think, right? So I guess something happened in his life, and he came back to Winnipeg and got into the local scene. Now he did maybe like 2 shows or something like that for Top Rope Championship Wrestling, which is the company I worked for. And then he flipped over to the NWA CWF, where there wasn't mixing. There was big heat, and you had to have a contract to wrestle with them, and they wouldn't let their guys work for other people and stuff. So I was on that first show. Paul came back and got to work on there in a tag match, and he was so nice, such an easygoing guy. And he was just hot off of being the head trainer for Shawn Michaels for that school and stuff, where like Brian Danielson and all those guys came out of. So really nice guy, really easy to work. And I can still remember, because he was just at another level from Winnipeg. We weren't getting names coming through. We weren't getting, I always compare when I go down to Minnesota, you'll have a locker room full of former guys that were in WWE or AWA guys are still there. In Winnipeg, it was not like that at all. We had guys that hadn't really been anywhere or been just a little bit, right? So I remember I did some little bit of chain wrestling with him, and he was so smooth and zip. And I was still young in my career, and I'm like, wow, I need to be this smooth, this phenomenal. And always a hell of an athlete. And a great guy, down to earth guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a fascinating career he had as well.
Oh, and I was a huge fan of Bad Company, because when he
AWA,
was in,
right?
Yeah, when he was in Bad Company, I really didn't get the AWA at that point, because they were on ESPN and I didn't have cable. And I just saw them in the magazines, and I'm like, wow, he's got these cool pants and these guys look so cool. And I would occasionally see footage of them, like, these guys are good. And of course you're going to see them against the Rockers, right? So, or the Midnight Rockers at that time. And then he went to WWF and did stuff there. But yeah, I loved him as Bad Company.
Yeah, I agree with you there too. Later that year, you and Vance won tag gold working against Kenny Omega and a partner. And I know
Ronnie
you worked Kenny quite a bit in that stage of your career. Did you see what he would evolve into at that stage?
At that point, no, but maybe like a year or two later, yes. He was still a very young boy there, a really good looking kid, could do some flips, the easy pop as a heel, like, you know what I mean? So a nice guy, but so many at that point, wrestling, the door was so open, people were coming in and out all the time, so you never knew who was going to stick. He was decent level hockey player, and still in high school at that time. So you're like, is the kid going to stick around or not? Who knows? But he was good. I knew, even though he was green, he was really good. and could do lots of stuff. But not till later on, I would notice that, wow, he's going to get there. And, Kenny and I we've known each other for so long. We used to communicate, hey, Kenny, I'm going to Japan, and he was there. We just never hooked up. But I never get credit here, but I'm the first guy to take him to the States for his first ever tour in the States. He doesn't even mention the show we went on, but I got him booked down to work in Wisconsin. And a crazy coincidence on that tour, we went to Minnesota for a day, and we went to a bar, and we ran into Eddie Sharkey, just random out of the blue, ran into Eddie Sharkey there, right? So just wrestling's a small world, even though it's wide and vast and so many people. And it seems like it's sparse, but it's a small world. So, but I didn't think he was going to make it to this level ever, because it's kind of out of your thought process at that time, because I said, I'm in dressing rooms with guys that never, the closest thing would maybe be a couple guys doing WWF squashes would be like, wow, they made it, so I never could imagine that, right? Because when you think, sometimes in your life, when you think big, it's big in your brain, but it's not as big as, I see that a lot talking to people that have been big, and I'm saying, oh yeah, I'm thinking about this, and they're like, think bigger, Rob. So if that makes sense, I never thought he would make it that size. But if I had maybe a different pedigree of wrestling, like let's say I would have came out of Stampede, I would have been like, wow, Kenny could definitely go. Because if you talk to any of those Stampede guys, they'd be like, oh yeah, this guy's going to Japan and this and this and this. It was regular for those opportunities, but not in Winnipeg. Those opportunities were not happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Speaking of Winnipeg, first of a bunch of fan questions that they sent to me was one fan wanted to know about your interactions with over your career. I know you've never, at least documentedly, faced him in the ring or worked with him, but your thoughts on Chris Jericho and the fact that he is still out there now, getting a lot of criticism and a lot of heat for being older now and not the Lionheart of '97 or whatever anymore. But your interactions with him and thoughts on his legacy and current activities.
Let me start with the last thing. So as a wrestler, you want heat. If you're a heel, you want reaction. So Chris Jericho, you're probably not watching this, but if you are, you're doing a good job getting heat, brother. Keep it up. That's how you're making your money. Let them talk. If they're not talking about you, if nobody was talking about Chris Jericho, then maybe he should hang him up. But they're talking about him, so he's doing a great job. I looked up to Chris Jericho, even though he's a Winnipeg boy, he wasn't really a Winnipeg wrestler, if that makes sense. He came in occasionally for Tony TVs, for Candello TVs, but not doing the Winnipeg local scene. I've never, ever been on a show with him, but lots of stories from guys that my mentors like Bobby J would hear these stories. And I remember watching him going, wow, like this, just before I got in the business, he started in WCW. And I remember the first ever ECW show I saw on like VHS tape when I was in college had him against Sabu. And I was super pumped because you'd read about him in the magazines and stuff like that. So Imaizi, someone I looked up to going, wow, somebody actually can make it. And Don Callis said, let's say he was getting there, but not as a wrestler, if that makes sense. So Chris was like, wow, he could make it, and hell of a career. And I look and go, I don't want to say that I'm trying to copy Chris Jericho. No way. But I definitely look and go, wow, Chris went to Mexico. And I'm like, I got to go to Mexico. Japan, I got to go to Japan. Stampede, I got to go to Stampede. Definitely look at some of those footsteps and try my best to follow them. So, yeah, he is definitely someone that anybody in Winnipeg looks up to. And me crossing Paso, interesting. And I don't want to give away a bunch of my book, but I'm going to give you this. The first ever wrestling show Chris Jericho did he was ring crew in my hometown of Rossford, Manitoba. And I was literally at that show.
Wow.
He mentioned it in his book. Now, I could be wrong because I read that Chris's book a long time ago, but I'm positive that he was ring. And then the Winnipeg Wrestling Lore says Chris Jericho took his first ever body slam from a veteran wrestler who's no longer with us, Caveman Baroda, a guy that wrestled locally all his life. He's doing matches. I want to say something crazy until he was like 80 years old. He gave Chris his first ever body slam, apparently in my hometown. And then the only other Chris Jericho crossing would be as a young boy breaking into the business. I used to work midnights at 7-Eleven cooking chicken. It was great because all the boys came for free food, right? Some of the things you got to do when you're training in this business. And so Chris Jericho grew up in that area of that 7-Eleven, and everybody knew at that store that I was like training to be a wrestler. So apparently he went into that 7-Eleven and he was already in like WWE at the time, WWF. It was I can't remember. Yeah, sure it was WWF. And I think it was literally just on WWF magazine the month before or something like that or whatever. And one of my coworkers got him to sign this pro wrestling WWF magazine, the cover had The Rock on it. So it's ridiculous. But Chris Jericho signed that. And yeah, so I sold it later on. Sorry, Chris. I sold it for some money. I need some money to live at the time. But that's the only things I could ever say is I'd love to drink beer with Chris Jericho because I like to drink beer and I think he does too. You know, that Jericho cruise. Jericho, you should book me for the cruise, man. I'm Canadian. I drink beer. Team Canada. And I just put you over saying, get the heat, brother.
I think Chris Jericho does watch this channel, so who knows what could happen from here.
That's right. But I mean, people are marks. Like, you get the heat. Like, that's your job. You know, like, I don't know.
They're talking about you, like you said. That's what counts.
Yeah, that's his job. You know.
You've worked a lot. Speaking of Sabu and ECW, you worked a lot, or quite a few, I would say, hardcore style matches. During your career. What are your like? Do you prepare differently for those? Do you find them easier or harder than other matches? And you know, we've seen kind of a lot of heat, not so much around hardcore, but the death matches and the light tubes and all that stuff. How do you respond to the critics of, you know, the blood and the weapons and all that good stuff?
You know, so first, do I prepare differently? I mean, I did a lot of hardcore when I was young, and I just wanted to get in the ring, get booked, and get seen, get noticed, right, and get that extra payoff. So I used to probably think a lot more about the match and gimmicks and this and this and this as a young guy. But to me, hardcore is easy to do now. Like, you know, I mean, even now, if I'm going to have a match, we have a match right now. Let's just go. I'm not going to worry about it too much, you know. But blood's been a staple of this business, you know. And I think that the problem is on an indie show, there's not necessarily a story behind it, if that makes sense. So you're just giving them blood and hardcore for shock value. They're not coming back next week. You're doing a spot show in, I don't know, wherever. You name the town in Ontario. You're not coming back next month. Probably next year you're going to come back. So it's just shock and awe. Look at me hit him with a chair. Look at me put him through a table. You know, and there was a while everybody was scared of disease when it comes to blood, and I get it. You know, luckily I've never had any issues. I've done double juice, you know, and when it comes to, let's say, light tubes, I want to say it was 2000. I brought light tubes to Winnipeg. I know that's not something to be bragging about, but we definitely used them a couple times. But I used them with the Crimson Sheik, who's the old guy that trained me. We used him outside the ring. It was like shock and awe, you know, and it was like we just won a match. And I remember the first time we used one, literally we had it outside the ring and the guy hit me in the gut and it fell down and exploded. And this is 2000 in a bar. And just from the light tube hitting the ground and exploding was a big pop. There wasn't like power bomb through a million or hit a million or put them all. It was one and hit the ground and got a big pop. That explains the different level, right? So then the next week, boom, we hit one. Just one, a big pop, hit a finish. I'm not saying we had great psychology in 2000. Nobody, I watched it. We all sucked, right? But the guys that are doing the light tubes, like they're doing it crazy now. And, but I think wrestling's art. And here's where I might be different that like, I think there's room for all that stuff. There is like, if I go to a restaurant, I like going to restaurants where I can order anything. If I go to a buffet, I like to be able to get all sorts of food because I love food. I love pro wrestling. So I want to see, I'm interested in seeing lucha libre wrestling. I like strong style Japanese. I like technical. I like Billy Robinson. You name it. You start going. I like Jen Kasai. Definitely. I think he's one of my favorite wrestlers. Kenta Kobashi is too. Like Nick Bockwinkel. These are all different things. Like I get it. Some people just like vanilla ice cream, and that's good. Enjoy your vanilla, man. Live your life. Go eat it. But I like chocolate swirl. I like Rocky Road. You name it. Like I love all the flavors. So I definitely think there's a huge audience for deathmatch wrestling, and I've only done a couple small level deathmatch wrestling like matches, but in my 26-year career, so don't people think here I've maybe only used light tubes maybe 10 times in my life, so maybe 20, but don't think I'm some deathmatch guy. I'm not, but definitely as a wrestler, especially an indie nobody, pay me and I'll do it because I want the money and I want to work. So I probably didn't, I get it, especially with Blood. You're talking about Hannibal, man, yeah, tough rap. That's shit. And that sucks, but definitely as a wrestler, you take those chances, and unfortunately I'm willing to take those chances.
Yeah, fair enough. One of the interesting things that I came across in your career was in 2002 in Brandon. You had a match with a partner against Davey Boy Smith and Harry Smith, and Harry is a former Great North Wrestling champion. We had him in Smith Falls a couple of years ago. Hell of a nice guy. I asked him about that, and that was apparently Davey's final official tag match. And then I guess you worked a 6-man after that. Just wanted to ask you about what that experience was like. And I know that we're going to talk about your Japanese career and endeavors in a minute, but Harry has he's the current champion over there, IWGP. So he may have opened some doors for you. But first, getting back to that particular historic tag match,
I was starstruck. Not a lot of names are coming through Winnipeg. I'd said that already, and Davey Boy fucking Smith, the British Bulldog. Like, wow, I had his wrestling doll as a kid, and to get that opportunity, not only so, it was cool to wrestle Davey Boy. It was cool. Don't get me wrong. Like it was like wow, and he hit me with the power sign, like all that stuff, right? And but man, we drove in the same vehicle together. We partied each night, different time. We partied aggressively each night together. Aggressively partied, I'll say that. And man, the things you would learn just talking to him, and he was so nice and so easy to work. Man, what a cool guy. And you know what? If he wouldn't have passed, then you can never think of what would have happened. But Bobby, the owner of Top Rope Championship Wrestling, said that he wanted to bring him all the time because he was game to come and work, and he got along with us all great. Like, man, it was. I can't even explain it. Like, it was so long ago, and it just really opened my eyes to the business and what a class act he was. I think nothing but fond memories for him of Davy Boy and that experience. And it just really sucks that he passed away the next week. Like, really sucks. And, you know, I've never done WWE enhancement matches, or I've never contacted them for a tryout or anything like that. Not that I would get them, you know, they might give me a cup of coffee, a tryout, and say, hey, good job, kid, see you later. But it's never been on my thing to do. But my cup of coffee, like, they aired clips of that match on WWE Confidential when they announced his death. I wish he was still alive, to be honest. But I mean, you never wish anybody would pass away. But sad time. But I didn't know him that well. You know, I knew him for a week of wrestling, and the biggest thing out of my career, out of that, is the relationship I built with Harry. He was still a young kid. He was maybe like 15. That guy loved the business. He still does. Like, I look up to Harry. We used to trade VHS tapes together. You know, I can't remember what I sent him, but he sent me like Wing and Wing Deathmatch and XPW and all this stuff. Like, and I think Harry truly loves all types of wrestling as well. Like, I'll just say that out there, right? And you know, I knew. So you asked me before if I knew Kenny Omega would make it. I knew Harry would make it. Maybe it's because I just knew. Maybe it's because where he was coming from, and you look at the history of guys that made it from Alberta, or from specifically Calgary. Like, you just needed to be there to make it. It seemed like, I'm not saying those guys definitely worked hard, but from someone on the outside looking in, you're like, the odds of a Stampede wrestler, in my eyes, making it to, let's say, Japan or anywhere, like, really making it, was high. So I knew, especially with his family background and then where he's coming from, but then his drive and talent, like, he truly loved, like, I had probably, I don't know why I'd say 10,000 VHS wrestling tapes, but I had a lot. I literally had a lot. Like, I used to double them and sell them to guys. Harry probably had a bigger collection than me, from my understanding base. Man, that guy loved the business. And it was like great for me to get to meet him. And he's helped me out a lot in different aspects of my career, so I appreciate that. But there's one guy in Winnipeg that gets no credit and needs to get a lot more credit, and that's beautiful Bobby J. He ran Top Rope Championship Wrestling. That's the company that I got to work Davey Boy Smith for. But that guy broke in Kenny Omega. He broke in Sarah Stock. Doesn't get any real big, this guy, you know what I mean? Like, and working for Bobby. So, hey, I got to work these names. That's where I worked Paul Diamond. He gave me these opportunities. But more importantly, I was making a living as a pro wrestler. Everybody in wrestling, listen closely. I was making a living just wrestling. We would do 5 shows a week, maybe four for sure, maybe 5. I was also doing the ring crew. I was doing the track. I was doing everything, but making a living. This guy did so much for the local guys. Unbelievable. Doesn't get any credit.
Yeah, most definitely. The historians of Canadian wrestling certainly can appreciate that. Speaking of which, before we get into your Japanese experience, I wanted to ask you about another guy who, you know, perhaps is in that category. Doesn't get a lot of you know, chatter about him, but what a mainstay of the scene for a number of years. And I know you wrestled him probably more than the record shows, but I'm talking about Chi Cruz.
Oh, yeah.
And why I've seen some of your matches on YouTube, and I'm a fan of his work generally, but wanted to ask you about your matches with him, and why that chemistry seemed to work, and where he probably should be getting some more recognition.
Man, Cheech, local legend, man. And I don't want to say local, because so interesting about Cheech is, in my eyes, when I broke into the business, he wasn't working local shows unless you were Tony Candello. And Tony didn't do a lot of shows locally. so you didn't really see Cheech. Cheech was doing, he'd go to the Maritimes. I remember he came to our training center and was working out some stuff because he had a WWF tryout, but he wasn't on the local scene. So then once I got a little older, he got on the local scene, and man, I think I might have worked him when I was a green boy, and it was just, yes, sir, take my chops and smile type match. But I already had like at least 10 years in, and we started to wrestle, and it was, I don't want to say his last hurrah, but he wasn't traveling anymore, and he really went for it. And we were both, it was good. He's so good. And you heard me talk earlier about in my dressing rooms, there would be no experience. And I'm looking at, that's Bobby Bolton, USWA. I saw, because I have the tapes. I had his tapes from I had a DVD of him, IWA Mid-South, wrestling Tracy Smothers also, because I'm a big wrestling fan, a big mark. So, I mean, his experience alone was so good. And just wrestling him was an honor and a night off, but a night of hard work too. So I loved it. And Cheech he loved that old fashioned where there's going to be a feud. It's going to be a proper feud. Screw over. Then there's going to be some color, and then there's a gimmick, and then it just keeps growing and growing. So Cheech was a top notch, and he should have got a break. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I think I'm right here that I believe that question about if Canada and the States had no border, things would be different for Cheech. I think that's a fact that Cheech, if he could have been traveling more in the States, and I think things would have been different for him. For many Canadian guys, things would be different.
You've been a rather ubiquitous presence on social media in the past few years, and your exploits your fascinating exploits in Japan you've documented well, right down to the minutia of where you're staying, what you're eating. Wanted to ask you a couple of questions about Japan.
Sure.
Starting with how did you first get booked there, and other than the obvious language barrier, what did you find it a big adjustment, like working in the ring to start when you first went over?
So how did I get booked in Japan? Easy. Wrestle in Mexico. You'll meet Japanese wrestlers. That's how it happened for me. I went down to Mexico for a family holiday, and we were in Cancun, and everybody says, everybody goes to Cancun, right? Like that's where you're going to go in Mexico if you're on a holiday. But all the wrestlers go to Cancun and they never wrestle there. I did a lot of research, which is something that if you want to know what separates me from other wrestlers, I do research. And I found a promotion, and I had sent them emails and DMs and everything, and no response, nothing, ghosted. So I reached out to one of my friends that could speak Spanish. There wasn't Google Translate back then. And he translated my message for me, and I sent it to him, and they booked me. So I did the show, and that's a real crazy story. But there was,
what was the name of the promotion? Is it the one that runs Cozumel too?
No, but these guys always use, they'll always use guys from AAA. So, and like, I think it's IWGR, like it's a big indie there. And so there was a guy, Hanoka. I always call him Dehana. I guess that's his shoot name. I shouldn't say it, but, and also, Doki from New Japan. They were there, and they're also they're not from Mexico, right? So we drank a lot of beer, and I had this conversation with a young guy in Minnesota, because the guy was like, I sent my resume to all these people, and I said, that's not where business is done, kid. I said, business is done in the bar. Like, most of my bookings are from drinking beer, to be honest, like when you really think about it. And so drinking beer with those guys, and I said, I really want to go to Japan. And there was a startup company, which I know some of your guys have went there now. So I was the first Canadian or first Gaijin to go to Matsuyama's Kanjiro Matsuyama, Osaka Pro Wrestling fame. He ran a company. He's using he's used Asuka, and he used some top quality people, and that's how I got booked there. And I'll tell you, you're asking ring, but I'm a small town country boy, and I like to think I've traveled because, hey, I'd been to Mexico a few times, and the States. Japan is a different world. Like, I can't even, it's just literally a different world. I love it so much. Like, I wish I lived there. I love it so much. Maybe if Canada becomes a 51st state, I'm moving to Japan. But that's another story. It just very different, and just do some. It's just different, and in the ring with those guys. So I didn't speak Spanish. I don't speak Japanese, although I'm working on speaking Japanese. But I pride myself on having strong wrestling fundamentals and really knowing the international language of pro wrestling. So again, I said, let's go right now. You and me, we can have a match. I don't need to talk to you. I don't need to speak the same language. Hopefully I can look you in the eyes during the match, and you know the international language as well. And if not, I can cover for you, so you do know the international language, if that makes sense. But just different culture, and great. Like, because I studied a lot of Japanese. Like, I still study wrestling. I studied a lot, and that's something I really studied. But what people don't understand is they think all Japanese wrestling is either death matches or all Japan strong style. It's not. Like, it's got every flavor too. It really does. Like, it's crazy high-end comedy pro wrestling Japan. Like, there's literally everything there. So I would say, though, the biggest difference, the indie wrestlers there take it very serious. It's you're there to do your job, and you work hard, and they work hard studying and learning their craft. There's no shitty, well, I shouldn't say no, there probably is, but very few shitty indie Japanese guys. And I don't want to say in North America there's a lot, but yeah, there's, the level's different, just a different level, different gear.
What those that are familiar with wrestling in Japan, the 70s, the 80s, the heyday of pro wrestling, has the way the country embraced pro wrestling changed from then, from your experience, like the days where the Road Warriors were on the front page of newspapers, and it was very much treated like a sport on a par with so many others? Have you seen, has that been your experience, or somewhere in between?
Another reason I love wrestling in Japan is because, and it's almost depressing when you come back to North America, like, they treat me, an indie nobody, like I am a big deal. People are taking me out. Like, we talked about Harry earlier, and Harry's helped me out so many different ways in my career. He got me booked in England, and he hooked me up with some we call them sponsors, but I call them friends. And they take you out, and they give you anything you want. They like to party, feed you, like, they just take care of you. And just to think about that, if I'm gonna go do a show in Thunder Bay, Ontario, no fan is gonna take me and give me money and take me out to eat and buy me whatever I want and drink and drive me here. And, like, it's just a different level of respect for the business. And I'm not saying the fans in North America don't respect pro wrestling. I'm not saying that at all. It's different. Japan is different. And to me, that's the biggest difference. Is there's such a wrestling bubble especially in Tokyo and Osaka, man. Tokyo especially, in that there's just wrestling everywhere. Like, there's wrestling bars, like different companies own bars. There's venues just for pro wrestling where the ring is always up. there's like 3 of them in Tokyo where you can. There's a new one now, Itabashi Pro Wrestling venue where it's, and then there's Shinjuku Face, Shinkaba First Ring. There's Monsters Basement. Like, I guess 2AW also has a venue always set up for pro wrestling. Like, all these places in one city always set up for pro wrestling, and there's shows at noon. There's a different company coming in at 5. There's different, like, it's just a different game. Just a different game.
And you've been to Ribera, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Many times. I've got my good old jacket. I can't kayfabe how I got it, but that's a different story. But I've got my jacket. The first time I went there, though, so I went there by myself because I got in and I had missed my flight. I miscalculated my flights, and I literally I get off the plane. You want to talk culture shock? Because there was the internet, and I said I do my research, but I definitely didn't research enough. I get off at Narita, and I think I could just get in a taxi and get to Tokyo, and they're like, "No, you got to get on this bus, and you got to wait." So I missed the 01 show. I missed my show for 01, and I'm like, I'm going to Ribera, so I go there on a taxi by myself, and if you're going to get the jacket, you can't be by yourself. Maybe if you're famous, you can, but you can't be an indie guy going yourself to get a jacket. You need a sponsor or a promoter or one of the experienced guys to really help navigate you to get that jacket, right? So I go there and I'm nervous, but it's just a restaurant, and it's wrestling all over. It's like, if you love wrestling, you're like, wow, look at all this stuff. So cool, right? So then I don't know how the gimmick works in that. So I ate my steak and drank my beer, and I'm paying, and the guy that I paid was the actual owner. I didn't know that at the time, but I'm like, I gave him a wrestling shirt and like I ran like hell because I was just scared. So they didn't know what's going on, right? I just thought some random guy's gonna come give me a jacket, and I've heard many indie guys say they're gonna just go there and get their jacket, and they smile because I know stories of guys that would go there night after night and they got a pair of sweatpants at the end of it. There's gimmicks involved, right? So anyways,
it's a process. We have time for one last fan question that I thought would be interesting, given your location and your familiarity with Stampede and the Hearts and Harry, etc. And that was your experience working the Anvil, Jim Neidhart, in 2005.
Yeah, I would say at that point, I'd been around long enough. I knew my job. I knew my job well, and I knew my job well, but I was stupid. So, because you've got those bright lights in your head because names weren't coming through Winnipeg that much. And man, I grew up watching this guy. I had his wrestling doll. I worked Davey Boy. I'm sure this is going to be awesome. And again, Jim was a nice guy. And we probably went about 6 minutes. But as I had experience, but stupid thinking we're going to have a long match, right? Now I just laugh and go, it was great. It was great. Hey, I worked Jim Neidhart, sold out bar show. It is what it is. Good guy, bucket lists. I wish I worked Bret Hart too, but Jim, a really nice guy and really strong. Oh my God, really, really strong. On another note, I'm surprised you haven't asked me about Kerry Pitbull Brown. I know we're running out of time, but I just got to say, you want to talk about Winnipeg guys that don't get their due. Kerry Pitbull Brown, Stampede Wrestling, Rick Valentine. He's a guy I look up to so much and traveled the road. He wrestled Antonio fucking Inoki. Mm-hmm. And I actually produced a shoot interview with him, and it's on YouTube. But wow, that guy, Stampede legend. I remember watching him, Stampede legend, and I worked him in a cage, barbed wire match, you name it. And I think of working with Kerry from Stampede Wrestling as like one of the top things in my heart when it comes to being a pro wrestler from Winnipeg. So not to just shoot an angle on you there, kid, but I definitely had to throw in Kerry.
No, definitely on the list as another guy that was so integral to the scene that doesn't get his shine. Did you ever encounter the infamous Bulldog Bob Brown?
Unfortunately, as a one guy, I really wish. I always have regrets of saying I never got to meet Bulldog Bob Brown. Hearing the stories of him sitting in the dressing room in his gotch, walking around all day, I really wish I got to meet him. And he was a legend. Like I go down and work SICW, and they're really St. Louis based, and he's a legend down there, and he doesn't get the respect he deserves in Winnipeg. All the old guys are jaded because Bulldog was probably a dick to them. Probably a dick. Don't quote me on that. Nobody shoot on me for that. But I'm sure he was a dick by all accounts. Everybody I've talked to in Winnipeg says Bulldog Bob Brown was a dick to them. Kerry told me Bulldog Bob Brown was a dick to the guys. Always politicking to whatever. But I think he's a legend, and I wish I got that opportunity. And interesting to see the local guys think he's a dick. And probably a lot of local guys think I'm a dick. But you go to other territories and, wow, Bulldog Bob Brown's a legend. And hopefully some of those other territories say, maybe not, I'm not a legend, but maybe I'm not a dick, they'll say, if that makes sense.
Whatever they say about him, he was certainly entertaining. I know you mentioned Don Callis earlier in that podcast that he had with Lance Storm. I think he Killing the Town, I believe it was called. They would talk about him all the time, and I think that did a lot to cement his legend. Did you ever see him being a tape guy, his match against Giant Baba?
Yes, I did. I get it. I think that was on AWA Wrestle Rock or something. I have a match of Bulldog Bob Brown versus Marty Jannetty in a cage. Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. And Bob Brown knew how to get heat. I'll tell you, to this day, if Bob Brown was in his prime, people would be talking about him. They'd be like, that old man should be out of the business. Maybe Jericho's stealing some stuff from Bob Brown, because I'll tell you, Bob Brown would get heat. And nowadays you couldn't do the stuff he did. He would call people horrible names and spit on them and all this stuff, but he could get heat. He knew his job well of being a heel wrestler. He knew it well. And you have to study these things now and put on the 2025 glasses and think, how can I change that from calling people with disabilities bad names to get heat in the 80s? How can I change that now to something that's okay in 2025? It's a tough thing to figure out, but
it's difficult. But yeah, what a natural heel. Sunview complimented your shoot with Kerry Brown and is asking if you ever did the part 2 follow-up with Kerry that they spoke about before he tragically passed.
No, unfortunately not. No, I wish I did. Kerry was such a class act. My wife even still asks, he's like, oh, Kerry was such a nice guy. And my wife doesn't like anybody in the business, but she liked Kerry Brown. So that tells you something about Kerry. And yeah, Kerry, awesome guy. Sadly, no, we didn't do a second interview. I got to say one other thing about Kerry Brown. So he taught us so much. And I say you always learn in the car and in the bar. And I remember being a young boy, picking his brain, doing like a Northern Death Tour for the CWF, those Winter Roads ones. And we're in this little shack, and I'm picking his brain saying, Kerry, how do you throw a good punch? I believe most of the people watching this are probably smartened up. Okay, and we've been drinking heavily, unfortunately. Well, hey, that's okay. Drink heavy. Go for it. Do you. And Kerry says, let me show you. So me and 2 other young guys were watching closely. Kerry's going to show us how to throw a good punch. And he goes, watch this. Oh, he's like, just sell. Oh, interesting.
Words of wisdom. Less is more. So I wanted to ask you what inspired you. A 2-part question here. What inspired you to write a book? Obviously, you've had an extremely interesting, unique career in many ways. And do you have any goals in the business left to accomplish? Because I know you've done a lot other than just wrestle, including promotion, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So what inspired me to write a book? I want to say I wrote a book because I'm literally an indie nobody. And I've had the opportunity to wrestle Japan. Like I think I did 6, 7 tours, Mexico, England, all across the States, all across Canada. I've done all these different things. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they can too. They literally can do it. Um, Writing that book was, and I don't want to say that, I love pro wrestling. I love wrestling books. I love all this stuff, right? So I wanted to do it. And, but it was kind of humbling because I've done a lot in my wrestling career, but then writing it out and you go, man, maybe I didn't do that much. But then I go to myself, am I just being hard on myself? I know lots of guys that just haven't left the perimeter of the city of Winnipeg, right? So I really want to write that book. And in that book, I had a wrestling bucket list where I broke into the business. And the only thing that I've not done on that bucket list is wrestle in Puerto Rico. So in my eyes, in my obsessive compulsive, I must complete the list type of guy I am, I need to wrestle in Puerto Rico before I can retire. And I just want to shoot over to YouTube for a second and say that COVID-19 had hit, and I'm like, there's no, like, there wasn't wrestling. Like in Winnipeg, there wasn't wrestling. I couldn't travel, couldn't do nothing. I was going to retire. And I'm like, I don't want to retire. I love wrestling, blah, blah, blah. So I started my YouTube channel, and I went through my bucket list, and that was kind of the gimmick, right? I'm going to go through my bucket list of things I wanted to do. And like Stampede Wrestling was on it, Winnipeg, like all this different stuff, right? So in my book, I write my new bucket list of things I want to do. And definitely, I still got some gas in the tank, I'll tell you. There's lots of unlimited amount of things I still want to do in this business. But most of my bucket list now evolves around helping. I want to help people that want to do it. I want to help young or not young. You don't have to be young. I want to help people if they really want to go to Japan and put in the work and do it. I want to help you. If you want to go to, I'll help you. I can teach you to do these things. I really can. And I guess that's more another reason why I wrote my book. So again, people can read it and go, if this guy can do it, I can. And 100%, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And again, if you're willing to put in some work, I'm willing to help especially Canadian. I don't want to say like that, but anybody, especially anybody that's put in that time in the business. But us Canadians do have it harder. So I have a soft spot in my heart for Canadians. So, and I've mentioned earlier, like I've been a trainer in a dojo for Japanese pro wrestling company. And if you watch my vlogs, please watch my vlogs, give me some views. I am a monetized YouTuber, so that helps. But you'll see, like, I know that indie scene very, very well in Japan. And yeah, I can definitely help. So I think that's my main thing I want to do. I still want to hit the road. And I've really cut down. I talked earlier about Cheech not working locally. At a point, I've really cut down my local bookings right now, and I'm doing more out of town stuff and my own stuff rather than the local stuff right now. That doesn't mean I'm not doing local wrestling. I get invited all the time, and eventually maybe I'll evolve back into that. But I just want to be different right now and be me, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So where can the fans find you on the socials, the YouTube channel, and most importantly, now that your book's dropped, where can they get their copy?
Okay, these are easy things. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just search Rob Stardom, maybe Rob Stardom Vlog. You'll find me there. I'm on X as Stardom Rob. The reason this last name first is because I got X in Japan, and because every Japanese wrestler had X or Twitter at the time. And in Japan, they say your last name first. So that's why I Stardom Rob. Facebook, I'll add you as a friend. I don't care. Just add me as a friend, Rob Stardom. Don't search Rob Maxwell. I won't add you as a friend. Rob Stardom, I will. Instagram, Rob Stardom. I'm not good at Instagram, but if you add me, I'll add you back because I'm dedicating myself to get better at Instagram. And where can you find the book? So lots of people already have the book, but I don't have a physical copy. This book I showed you says not for sale. My physical copies are coming next week. I'll have some at shows in the States. I'll have physical copies. I'll have some at the shows I do in Canada, physical copies. I've got both places. But then just search Rob Stardom on Amazon. It pops right up. Or click my link in all my social media. It's on every one of my social media. It's got a link. Click it. If you click my link, I get an extra like 50 cents because it's affiliate. So please do that. I really appreciate that more than, but I appreciate any support and mind blowing. So all you guys, if anybody's still listening, it must mean you truly love wrestling, because I'm a nobody and I'm impressed you're listening for an hour and 15 minutes of me rambling. But if I can write a book, you can write a book. If I can go to Japan, you can go to Japan. If I can be a pro wrestler, maybe not you. You have to want it to be a pro wrestler. But everything I've done, anybody can do.
Well, I think you're a self-deprecating individual and have had a very noteworthy career. Encourage fans to find you and grab your book. I know I'm going to, and I want to thank you, Rob, for being on the Great North Wrestling podcast today.
Oh, no, it's been my pleasure. I watch this. You guys are huge in the wrestling business. So giving this small town Manitoba boy, local nobody, opportunity to get on your podcast, I truly, truly appreciate it. Thank you. And please keep promoting pro wrestling. It's what we love. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, fans, that's it for this Thursday edition of the Great North Wrestling podcast. If you haven't already, click subscribe to the Hannibal TV, hit that notification button, and you will continue to be advised of great content such as this. Until next time, I'm Jack Kilby. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or